A little girl was walking her 5 German shepherds on the street when suddenly one of her dogs ran towards the lake. A figure was lying on it, making her shocked. Rain tapped against the warped wooden porch of the old house as Emma sat curled in the corner, her small hands clutching a worn badge, a tiny metal dog etched with her dad's initials, J.H. She was 5, but her eyes carried a weight no child should know. 3 months ago, her parents, James and Caroline, didn't come home. They'd been on a rescue mission, training dogs to find lost hikers in the mountains. A storm hit, the roads turned to mud, and their truck slid off a cliff. The news came in whispers from the sheriff to her grandparents, but Emma heard it all from the stairs. Now, the house was too quiet. No more of her dad's deep laugh or her mum's soft humming. Just silence, broken only by the creak of the floorboards under her grandparents' slow steps. "Emma, honey, you want some soup?" Grandma Margaret's voice drifted from the kitchen, gentle but tired. Her silver hair was pulled back and her hands shook a little as she stirred a pot. No answer came. Emma just stared at the badge, tracing the dog's shape with her thumb. Grandpa Walter shuffled in from the garden, wiping mud off his boots. "She'll eat when she's ready," he muttered, his voice gruff but kind. He glanced at Emma, then away, his own eyes red from holding back tears. They'd been trying to keep things normal. Margaret tidying the house, Walter fixing the fence. But the emptiness left by James and Caroline hung heavy. Then came the knock, 3 sharp raps on the door. Walter opened it and there stood Jack, a broad-shouldered man in a faded jacket, his face weathered from years in the field. Behind him, 5 German shepherds sat in a neat row, their ears perked, eyes sharp. Max, the leader, stood tallest, his fur a deep black and tan. Luna tilted her head, soft and watchful. Rex puffed out his chest, all muscle and grit. Bella's tail flicked, quick and alert. Shadow lingered at the back, quiet as a ghost. Jack cleared his throat. These were James and Caroline's last team. Trained them for a big rescue op. They're yours now, if you'll take them. Margaret's spoon clattered into the pot. "Ours? Jack, we can barely—" She stopped, glancing at Emma, who'd lifted her head for the first time in weeks. Walter stepped forward, frowning. "What's the catch?" Jack shook his head. "No catch. James always said if anything happened, these dogs belonged with Emma, their family." His voice cracked a little on that last word. Emma slid off the couch, her bare feet silent on the wood. She crept closer, eyes wide, until she stood in front of Max. He didn't move, just met her gaze with a steady calm. She reached out, her fingers brushing his fur, and a tiny smile flickered on her lips, the first since the accident. "Max," she whispered, so soft it was almost lost in the rain. Luna nudged her hand, and Bella let out a small yip. Rex and Shadow stayed still, watching her like guards. Upstairs, she'd hidden from the world, but now, with the dogs around her, something sparked. Margaret watched from the doorway, her apron twisted in her hands. "Oh, Walter, look at her," she said, voice trembling with hope. Walter grunted, but his mouth twitched into a faint smile. "Guess we're making room then." He turned to Jack. "They're staying." Jack nodded, tipping his cap. "Good, James be proud." Emma sank to her knees, the dog circling her like a shield. She remembered her dad's voice, low and warm, calling Max through a hoop in the yard, her mum's laugh as Luna licked her face. The badge slipped from her fingers, landing on the floor with a soft clink. She didn't pick it up. Instead, she leaned into Max, her cheek against his fur, and for a moment, the house didn't feel so empty. The kitchen light flickered as Margaret hunched over the table, her thin fingers sliding coins into shaky stacks. Bills sprawled across the scratched wood. Electricity overdue, a vet invoice for the dog's shots, a pharmacy receipt for Walter's heart pills. She whispered numbers under her breath, each one a punch to the gut. The savings from James and Caroline's life insurance were gone, swallowed by funeral costs and the endless drip of daily expenses. 5 dogs meant 5 mouths to feed, and the grocery runs were bleeding them dry. She glanced at the pantry, half empty except for a dinted can of soup and a bag of kibble stretched thin. "We'll make it work," she muttered, but her voice cracked like brittle glass. Walter wasn't helping. 2 nights ago, he'd climbed the ladder to patch a leak in the roof during a downpour, stubborn as ever, refusing to wait. The wind caught him and he'd tumbled into the muddy yard, his hip slamming against a rock. Now he limped around with a cane, wincing with every step, and the hospital bill landed like a brick through the window. $3,000, due in 30 days. He sat in the living room, staring at the TV static, his pride bruised worse than his body. Should have let it leak, he grumbled when Margaret brought him tea. She didn't answer, just pressed her lips tight and turned away. Emma felt it too, even if they tried to hide it. She'd stopped smiling again, her brief spark snuffed out. She perched by the window all day, the dogs sprawled around her like a fortress. Max at her feet, Luna's head in her lap, Rex pacing restless circles. Bella dropped a chewed-up tennis ball by her side, nudging it with her nose, but Emma only brushed it away. Shadow sat apart, his dark eyes tracking her every breath. She didn't talk anymore, not even to them. The badge stayed on the floor where she dropped it weeks ago, gathering dust. Margaret tried singing an old lullaby one night, her voice wobbling through the chorus, but Emma just pulled the blanket over her head. Then the phone rang. Walter hobbled to pick it up, his face hardening as Jack's voice crackled through. "Look, I hate to do this," Jack said, "but the center's asking about the dogs. If you can't keep them fed and healthy, they've got to go back. They're trained for work, not sitting around." Walter gripped the receiver, knuckles white. "We're managing," he lied, but Jack wasn't fooled. "I'll give you a week to figure it out. I'm sorry, man." The line went dead, and Walter sank into the chair, his cane clattering to the floor. That night they argued in hushed, desperate tones. Margaret stood by the sink, tears streaking her wrinkled cheeks. "They're all she's got left of them, Walter. We can't take that away." He slammed his fist on the counter, softer than he meant to, his strength fading. "And what happens when we can't eat, when the lights go out? We're drowning here, Maggie." She turned away, clutching her apron, but he was right. They were out of moves. The next morning he knelt by Emma's chair, his bad hips screaming as he lowered himself. "Sweetheart," he said, voice breaking, "the dogs! We can't keep them, they're going back to Jack." Her eyes flicked to his, wide and hollow, then she bolted. The door to her room slammed shut, the sound echoing like a gunshot. The dogs knew. Max pressed his nose to her door, a low whine rumbling in his throat. Luna scratched at the wood, her paws leaving faint marks. Rex growled at nothing, his hackles up, while Bella circled the hall, restless. Shadow just sat, staring, his stillness heavier than the rest. Margaret found Walter in the garden later, his hands digging into the dirt for no reason. "We're failing her," he said, not looking up. She didn't argue. In the dead of night, Emma cracked her window open. Rain streaked the glass and the dogs lay in the yard below, their fur matted and dark. "Stay," she whispered, her voice a ghost in the storm. A tear slipped down her cheek, then another, the first she'd let fall since Jack brought them. Upstairs, Walter found a crumpled drawing under her bed. 5 dogs sketched in pencil, their shapes rough but clear, surrounded by 2 stick figures labeled Mum and Dad. The edges were smudged, wet from her quiet sobs. He held it to his chest, his own eyes burning, and wondered how much more they could lose. The deadline loomed. 2 days until Jack would come for the dogs. Emma hadn't left her room since Walter's words, but that morning the dogs wouldn't let her stay hidden. Max pawed at her door, a steady thump-thump, while Luna whined, sharp and insistent. Rex nosed the leashes off the hook, dropping them at the threshold, and Bella barked once, sharp enough to pierce the silence. Shadow just waited, his gaze boring through the wood. Emma cracked the door, her face pale, eyes sunken. She didn't speak, just grabbed the leashes with trembling hands and slipped on her muddy sneakers. "Fine," she muttered, her first word in days, barely audible. The dogs surged around her, tails wagging, and she led them out, a quiet procession into the grey dawn. The park was a short walk, its paths slick with dew, the air crisp and biting. Emma kept her head down, the dogs fanned out around her like a shield, Max in front, Luna close, Rex scanning the trees. Bella darted ahead, sniffing the grass, while Shadow trailed behind, ever watchful. A jogger nodded as he passed, his breath puffing in the cold, but Emma didn't look up. She stopped by the lake, its surface still as glass, and sat on a bench, the leashes loose in her lap. The dogs settled, alert but calm, their ears twitching at every rustle. Then Max stiffened. His head snapped toward the water, a low growl rumbling in his chest. Emma frowned, following his gaze. A man lay crumpled near the shore, half hidden by reeds, motionless, his jacket tangled in the mud. He'd slipped while running, hit his head on a rock and blacked out. Max didn't wait. He bolted, leash snapping free, and the others followed like a trained unit. Emma stumbled after them, heart pounding. Max reached the man first, teeth clamping onto his sleeve, tugging him away from the water's edge. Rex braced his paws in the mud, pushing from behind, while Luna steadied Max, her smaller frame taut with effort. Bella and Shadow raced back, barking loud and wild, their cries cutting through the morning. A woman walking her terrier heard it first. "What the?" she gasped, dropping her coffee as she ran toward the noise. Others followed, 2 teens on bikes, an old man with a cane, drawn by the dog's urgent chorus. Max dragged the man clear and Rex nudged him onto his side just as his eyes fluttered open, dazed and coughing. Emma stood frozen, hands clenched, watching the dogs work like they'd been born for this. The woman knelt by the man, shouting, "Call 911!" One of the teens fumbled for his phone, hands shaking, and filmed it all. Max standing guard, Luna licking the man's hand, the rest circling protectively. Paramedics arrived fast, lights flashing, and the crowd buzzed as they loaded the man onto a stretcher. "He's breathing. Lucky those dogs found him," a medic said, nodding at Emma. She didn't respond, just stared as the dogs trotted back to her, mud-streaked and panting. The teen's video hit the internet by noon, captioned, "Kid and her dogs save a guy's life. Insane." It spread like wildfire. Thousands of views, then tens of thousands, comments flooding in. "Those dogs are unreal. Who's the girl?" A local news van rolled into Hyannis that afternoon, reporters knocking on doors, piecing together Emma's story from neighbors' hushed tales. By evening, a man showed up at the house. Tall, with a scar across his brow, he carried himself like someone who'd seen hard days. Walter met him at the door, cane in hand, wary. "Name's Daniel," the man said, voice rough but steady. "I'm the guy from the lake. Your dog saved me today." Margaret peeked out, dish towel twisting in her hands. "And?" Walter grunted. Daniel took a breath. 5 years ago, James and Caroline pulled me out of a flooded river during a storm. I'd have drowned without them. When I saw the news, "Your granddaughter, those dogs, I knew. They trained them, didn't they?" Walter nodded, slow and stiff. "Yeah, they did." Daniel stepped closer, eyes locked on Emma, who stood in the hall, the dogs at her heels. "I owe them my life," he said, "twice now. I'm not here to gawk. I'm here to help." Margaret's towel slipped to the floor, and Walter's grip tightened on his cane. Emma looked up, her fingers brushing Max's fur, and for the first time in weeks, her eyes held something new, not just pain, but a flicker of wonder. Daniel didn't waste time. The next morning, he pulled up in a beat-up pickup, the bed loaded with bags of dog food, enough to last months. He hauled them to the porch, sweat beating on his scarred forehead, and handed Walter a thick envelope. $5 grand, he said, voice low. "It's what I've got saved. Use it for the dogs, the bills, whatever you need." Walter stared, his cane trembling in his grip. "We can't take this," he started, but Daniel cut him off. "You're not taking it. I'm paying a debt. James and Caroline gave me a second chance. This is mine to them." Margaret stepped out, her eyes glassy, and nodded. "Thank you," she whispered, clutching his hand like it was a lifeline. Word spread fast in Hyannis. By noon, neighbors trickled in, Mrs. Larson from down the street with a pot of chili, old Pete with a toolbox to fix the sagging fence. A vet named Dr. Harris, who'd seen the news, showed up with his kit. "Checkups on the house," he said, grinning as he knelt by Max, who sat still as stone. Luna wagged her tail, Rex sniffed his bag, Bella danced around, and Shadow watched from the corner. "Healthy as can be," Harris declared, packing up. "No charge." A kid from the park dropped off a soccer ball, scrawled with "For the Dogs" in marker. Envelopes started piling up too, small donations from strangers who'd caught the story online, tucked with notes like, "Keep fighting, little one." Inside, the house felt different. Margaret hummed as she stirred a pot, her shoulders lighter. Walter eased into his chair, the lines on his face softening as he watched the dogs sprawl across the rug. They called Jack that night. "They're staying," Walter said, firm and final. Jack chuckled through the line. "Good to hear. Knew you'd pull through." The weight that had crushed them for weeks lifted, just a little, and for the first time in months they sat down to dinner with the radio on, a soft country tune filling the air. Emma started moving again. She took to the backyard, perched on the old tire swing Walter had patched up, the dogs lounging in the grass around her. She'd tilt her head back, letting the sun hit her face, her fingers trailing in Bella's fur. One afternoon she grabbed a stubby pencil and a scrap of paper from the kitchen. She sat cross-legged on the floor, sketching. Max's sharp ears, Luna's gentle eyes, Rex's broad chest. The lines were wobbly, but she lingered over each one, her tongue poking out in focus. When she finished, she slid it onto the table where Margaret found it later, a quiet gift that made her smile through tears. Daniel stopped by again, this time with a thermos of coffee. He sat with Emma on the porch steps, the dogs sprawled between them. "Your folks saved me from that river," he said, staring at the horizon. "Rope around my waist, water up to my neck. They didn't quit. You've got that in you too, kid." She didn't answer, but her hand rested on Max's head, steady and sure. Later, she tugged the leashes from their hook and led the dogs around the yard, her steps slow but deliberate. Rex bounded ahead, and she let out a small, breathy laugh. The sound so faint Margaret almost missed it from the window. The healing was slow, fragile, but it was there. The dogs felt it too. Tails wagged harder, eyes brighter. The house wasn't whole, not yet, but it was alive again, stitched together by hands that refused to let it fall apart. Sunlight warmed the backyard as Emma sat on a blanket, tossing a stick. Bella snatched it, dropping it at her feet. "Good girl," Emma murmured, her voice soft but clear. Max perked up, Luna woofed, and Rex nudged closer. Shadow edged in, eyes bright. She scratched Rex's ears, saying, "You too, stronger now." Margaret dropped her dishcloth, tears welling. "Walter, listen," she whispered. He shuffled over, grinning as he heard her. "Teaching 'em tricks, kiddo?" he asked, sitting beside her. She nodded, leaning into him, the dogs circling tight. That night, neighbors brought burgers and chairs for a cookout. Kids chased the dogs and Emma sat on the steps, watching. Daniel joined her. "They're yours, huh?" he said. "Yeah," she replied, firm. Margaret snapped a photo. Emma with the dogs, Walter and Daniel behind, sky pink. Later, Emma asked, "Grandma, did they like stars?" Margaret smiled. "Loved 'em, sweetie." Next morning, Emma led the dogs to the hill, sat and whispered their names. Max, Luna, Rex, Bella, Shadow. They flopped beside her and she giggled, the sound free. The house felt alive again. Not perfect, but full.